Time for TikTok, the sales channel that can hold up to the future. Svenya Scholl has been the project consultant for the Competence Center 4.0 at EFH Cologne since 2019. She is the expert for young social media users. Have fun with the presentations. Well, hello again. Thank you for coming to my presentation on TikTok. TikTok is a very exciting topic. It is a platform on social media that is developing quite rapidly, and here we see that there's a lot of room to grow into the future, especially when it comes to consumers. My name is Svenya Scholl. I am project manager, project consultant at the EHK Cologne, and we have worked on a study that dealt with social media from the perspective of customers and retail. And TikTok obviously has a very important role to play here. So that's why we are going to look into what we were able to find out about TikTok, how you can use TikTok for retail, for sales, and how it interacts with other social networks. First of all, we have to look at the sales statistics in the first place. If we want to use TikTok as a sales channel for the toy industry, we have to look at how the sales channels are performing in this area in general and how they interact. The online channel is what we can see here in this graph, is gaining importance when it comes to sales overall. We have online pure players. That means companies that are only represented online and account for 20 to 30% of total sales, which is it is a big chunk that we have to deal with here. So retailers have to ask themselves, how are we going to deal with this development? How can we create and generate sales channels that will persist in the future as well? And when we ask this and look at TikTok, we also have to ask the benefit that we can have from using social media. How relevant are they for us, for retail? So we had some surveys in the past years among consumers regarding social media, and 84% of all users said that they do use social media. And you have a look at the groups, the target groups of people between 16 and 29-year-old, we can see that the potential is even larger because almost everyone in that age group until they're 29, between 16 and 29, they use social media in one way or another. So that's why these social media channels are a very good channel to address and reach out to these groups. If we have a look at the other platforms, or in other words, if you compare TikTok to other platforms, we see that it's still not in the top of the ranks. We can see it in the bottom half of this list when it comes to number of users. But if we do compare the numbers from the past years and look at the trends for the future and try to make a prognosis, we can draw the conclusion that TikTok is going to be very important and will develop to a sales channel that will involve influencers and will continue growing as a platform so that it will turn into a marketplace in future as well. So that's a development you should keep your eye on, especially if you are in the toy industry, as you all are. How can we use this channel to reach out to our customers, to address our customers? And if you think about it, TikTok is a perfect fit for this industry because you can reach out to many young customers. If you see here, the bottom line The one at the bottom we have TikTok, and the size of the bubble represents the amount of users in the specific age groups. And we can see that the bubble for the 16 between 19-year-olds is pretty big. We have 61 users, 61 million users, not quite sure. But you can see that also in the older age groups, there are people who are starting to have a look into what TikTok is. They're getting curious, they're checking it out. So we see that this is a platform that is up and coming, especially in the German markets. Abroad, it is much more advanced, it is much more popular than in Germany. But here, TikTok is growing as well, and that's why we can assume that it is going to be a very relevant social network in future. Now, I would just like to explain what TikTok is for all of those users who have not seen this app yet. The app is the most widely used app all over the world. They now have 1 billion monthly users. That is a lot. So TikTok has a huge potential worldwide, but also in Germany. It is a platform for vertical video clips, meaning that they don't focus on static images or on photographs. They're really specialized on moving images, vertical format videos of up to 1 minute, where you can place all imaginable kinds of content. It can be an animation, it can be in video, it can also be to provide inspiration for all kinds of topics. Basically, it's an open field. And in very few seconds, you can share lots of, produce and share lots of content from all different kinds of countries. TikTok as a network is on the way of becoming an e-commerce channel. So here are many opportunities for retailers as they can integrate a sale button or a buy button in the video. So if you can make a product video and have a button in that video so people can click on that and go right to your page or to your shop and purchase that product. So you can really tap into the stimulus that you can give to the customer and drive them to sales in the same video directly. At the same time, this network, this social platform, the social network is an incubator for global trends. We're going to have a couple of practical experiences later on, but there are many brands that can really, really push forward and push their popularity and their presence on the market by placing videos, product videos on TikTok. It is also a good idea to keep an eye on hashtag TikTok made me buy it. It is a hashtag where you can link videos with products that you have bought because TikTok motivated you to buy it, and we have 8.5 billion clicks on this hashtag. So actually, when I opened it up today, it was even more. So you can see that TikTok made me buy it really is a channel that is hugely relevant for retail and for motivating people to buy stuff. So we're going to have a look at TikTok in more detail and how you can use it for the different age groups. Another very important question is how does the use of social network change and evolve over time? We could see that TikTok, especially through the pandemic, was able to have a huge reach. It became widely popular. It is more popular than other platforms like Facebook, for example. If you look at Facebook, there are not many new users that joined Facebook. And even in the younger age groups, there are less new registered users than a while back. So we actually have a minus figure here, which is quite revealing if you think about it. So TikTok has this opportunity to move forward because Facebook basically has lost its snaz. And when we compare it to other platforms, we can see that of all the apps, TikTok is the one that is opened most times, most frequently during a single day. We can see that young users, they use the TikTok app. If you look at the bars, we see that TikTok is used much more than the other platforms. So here you can also see that we have 16 users of TikTok per day compared to 11, 7, or 4 of the other platforms. It all shows that TikTok has a huge potential to reach out to customers. And here we can see an overview of why people use a platform or what they use a platform for and how it compares to the other platforms. In all of the categories, TikTok has excellent figures, has excellent results. So TikTok can also be used as a channel to gain information. Many people, they go to TikTok to get information, which is something that you wouldn't have thought, because many people still associate it with lip-syncing videos and dancing videos. But it is a portal, it's an app that can show trends, that can inform people about trends and inspire people. So that's something that you also have to take into account. So in this sense, it is the platform number one when it comes to getting information and for influencers. It started as a lip sync and dancing video platform, but now there are many, many different ideas of how you can produce content, entertainment content on TikTok. And you can see that many businesses can create videos, not only to inform, but also to entertain people. So it's more than just seeing a boring old ad. It's more of content that involves the products and presents the products in a fun, modern way. And a social media marketing strategy can definitely use this as a new approach. And then we also looked at which networks are most popular among Germans. And at the end of the day, you have to compare these data. Sometimes we see that young age groups, of course, TikTok is very, very relevant. When it comes to the age group 16 to 29, 13 said that TikTok was their favorite platform. So it is a pretty good number here, but on average, the app is not doing as well as you might think, at least in Germany, because you're only looking at the figures in Germany. But when it comes to the global perspective, it does have a lot of potential. These figures I'm bringing here are also very, very interesting. What we did is that we asked users and experts of these platforms what they think about these platforms regarding different statements. We asked, do you think that TikTok is outdated, or is it superfluous, or is it boring, or is it innovative, is it inspiring, and all of these different aspects. And then we put all of the answers in this graph, and we're able to see that TikTok on all of the statements and all of the levels had a very good result. So you can also see that TikTok is a very, very likable social network. And if you're interested in the information, what is it with people who just use the platform, not actually TikTok experts? When it comes to users, we can see that TikTok has an excellent perception. It is seen as innovative, it is trendy, it is exciting, it's inspiring, it is trustworthy, likable, and authentic. And many people see it as an indispensable platform. And if a retailer looks at a social network platform, authenticity is very important, because that allows companies to present a very authentic and very honest image of themselves. And here we have, again, an age comparison, that even when we compare the ages, we see that TikTok is a very important social media channel for them. We asked which platforms are the ones that drew people's attention to products the most, and which platforms motivated people to buy products the most. And here we can see that TikTok is a channel that's still growing, so that means there's still a lot to do. But still, if we look at the age group 16 to 19, once again, we can see that 17% of the answers were for TikTok, meaning that there's huge potential here. This platform is developing with the users. It is growing with the users, and as people grow and move on in life, they take the platform with themselves as well. So for the German market, it is not as relevant as in other countries. Instagram still is the winner here, but still TikTok is an appealing platform to many young users. So in that sense, it is an important platform. And if you do influencing marketing or thinking about influencing marketing, you should also have a look at TikTok. Here we have the figures on the answers for the question whether someone had bought a product after the person saw an influencer using that product on one of the platforms. And the figures for TikTok, we can see that we can definitely see that TikTok is very relevant when it comes to influencer marketing, especially in the age group 16 to 29. We also wanted to try to quantify the potential for retailers. So we had a look at the potential, which are the platforms that are being used and what they are being used for, in order to be able to quantify the potential. But it was quite difficult to clarify that. So in order to get an answer, we asked people whether they follow companies on social media and why they did so. And 48% on average said that they do follow companies and manufacturers on social media. So if you have an account in social media, you can also reach out to people. You can provide information, you can address them, you can activate your customers, and give them the opportunity to delve even deeper in the customer journey. It does not come as a surprise that manufacturers do perform a little bit better than other companies. So manufacturer pages are usually a bit bigger or have more information than retailers. That does not mean that retailers are irrelevant, but manufacturers are usually specialized on specific products, while retailers, they have a wider range of products, so they have more possibilities. It is important to understand that manufacturers can have good opportunities, good sale opportunities by selling directly to their customers via social media. And of course, we wondered, why do people follow manufacturers and retailers on social media? And information about new products was one of our top answers. The consumers really want to know about new products. They want to know about discounts, for example. That's something that is very easy to roll out through social media, using influencers, for example. They also follow companies in order to get tips and tricks on how to use their products. You can use that for TikTok, for example, to do explainer videos. And I've read a couple of examples that I will show you in a bit. Quite interestingly, there were some consumers who said that they follow the manufacturers and retailers because they want to support them. So not everyone prioritizes or is only interested in the information, but they actually want the company to do good. They want to see what they're up to, and they want to do something to help the company or the manufacturer or the retailer to grow and be better. So that is a very good indicator that whatever you're doing, it seems to be the right thing. And we've asked which channels the consumers tend to follow, the manufacturers. And we can see that Instagram was very popular. TikTok was the second runner-up, and it would be interesting to have a look at these figures that have a similar survey later on if we have a new platform, to see how this will change the followership on other platforms. We knew a couple of years back Facebook was the platform for young people, and then we can see that some of the social networks, they start to age, and currently TikTok is the one, it is the youngest social platform, it has the youngest content, and is the one that appeals to the youngest age groups. We also wanted to see how relevant this is for consumers and when it comes to e-commerce. So we also asked whether people agreed or did not agree to the following statements. For example, the ones in the bottom, TikTok should have more shopping offers, and TikTok should develop to become a shopping platform. And half of the consumers said that they agree that they would like that. So it would not be a negative or a bad idea if you try to sell things through TikTok, because consumers actually are asking for it. So how could you implement all of this in TikTok? You could have discount codes, for example. They are very popular. You can show product prices. At the end of the day, you follow the retailers on TikTok or on the social media platforms to be able to learn about new discounts or learn about prices of products. And you can also present your products using real people, because it's all about social exchange. It's about seeing the moving image, and people like to buy from people and not from companies. So you can use that. You can channel this with TikTok. You can use an authentic person. It can be an employee. It can be an influencer. And you can make a video with them so they can present the product that they are selling. Also, TikTok is a platform that gives opportunity for a great variety of topics. You can try different formats, different content, different topics, different trends that have already been there, or you can reinsert new trends, breathe new life into them. That's something that works quite well on TikTok, also for retailers. TikTok is a platform that comes from the entertainment side of things. So yes, it is very clearly an entertainment platform, so you can get creative and you can put an emphasis on the entertainment factor when you do so. And now I have brought a couple of TikTok videos. I hope that the videos will be shown correctly here. And we're seeing a huge company that has the opportunity of investing a lot in marketing, but you can also produce videos with a low budget. And you can see it in these three examples. This is very entertaining content. And here, a couple of employees, they made a very entertaining video and showed what they do in the store after the hours when they close the doors and the last customer leaves. What are the employees up to? And here we see a toy store from Austria. They have their own account on TikTok where they introduce products, they present products, they show what they have in stock, how they use it, how you can play with it, and sometimes they even have challenges where you call users to action and challenge the users using these products. And this has generated a huge followership, and the thing about the challenges is that all of these followers then do user-generated content using these products. So TikTok is a trend-setting product. Here is where trends are born. Quite recently, I read an interesting article about the Hobbit fidgets, the fidget spinners. And people who do not use TikTok, they will not understand where this trend is coming from. But there's a huge hype regarding puppets. And from my perspective, it's very difficult to understand. But if you have a look at the content on TikTok surrounding puppets, then suddenly you see why it's a no-brainer. This product was presented back then on TikTok, similarly as it had been presented with the fidget spinner, and it was hyped. It was hyped to such an extent that no company, no retailer that sells toys could not have these toys on stock or in their stores. So this is a trend that was either born on TikTok, or at least the trend was really fueled by TikTok videos as well. So it is a good idea to maybe initiate trends on TikTok or use TikTok to promote these trends. Here you have an overview of how TikTok can be used by retailers and how relevant it is. We're just going to go over it quite quickly. We have the different areas that are interesting on TikTok. We have fitness and sports, travel, fashion. We do not have toys, but still you could put it into the category of lifestyle, because lifestyle and toys, they go together. And if you break it down by age groups, or the younger age groups, you can see that this platform is the way to go, because here is where you will find your target groups. The activities that people go to TikTok to get information, to look at trends for entertainment purposes, or because they're bored. And here you can send and share posts, share videos. But this platform also promotes the idea of being creative, of being a maker in all kinds of formats. So yes, the target age group is quite young on this platform, and if you have a look at the population as a whole, it's not that relevant, especially for German retail. But if you have a look at Asian markets, you can see that there are many, many live streams that are offered via TikTok, where influencers can sell products directly, and the sales that are generated there, they are enormous. So if you have a look at what's going on in Asia, it's kind of like looking into the future of what could be happening here in Germany in a couple of years when you use the trends of live streams and moving images. If you move away from static images, you will see that videos are the ones that are coming. Instagram, for example, now has Instagram Reels. Facebook now included stories. Even YouTube has YouTube Shorts that allows users to share and to generate and upload short videos. So it is a trend that is definitely very, very interesting, especially for retailers from the toy industry that need to address very young audiences, where they can present their products, they can entertain their audiences, the target groups, and sell their products. So that basically is my presentation on TikTok. If you would like more information on the study, please contact me, or you can just visit our store of the EAH. You can download it. There are no hidden costs. Don't worry about that. I really recommend you guys and girls and ladies and gentlemen to download the study. And if you do use TikTok, I wish you lots of success, and I'm really, really excited to see what it has in store for us in future. If you have any questions, I am available. I'd be more than happy to answer them.